2007 through present day Toyota Tundra with the 5.7 liter engine, radiator and thermostat replacement. I'm Brian Esser from How to Automotive. I'm going to walk you step by step through the process of changing out the radiator and thermostat. So as you can see here, the radiator is leaking from the top tank on this vehicle. I wanted to start out by showing you the parts before we get started. This is the parts for the thermostat and radiator. I will link up all the parts, including the fluids, in the description of the video. I will also link up the tools that I'm using in this video in the description. That way, if you need to pick up any of those, you can find those links there. To get started, we're going to get the coolant draining. It's faster if you remove the radiator cap. Then we're going to go underneath the vehicle and remove the lower skid plate here. We're going to follow around the perimeter, and there's going to be a couple clips and 12mm bolts. So they're going to be inside the holes here. So there's going to be 5 fasteners in total, 3 in the back and 2 in the front towards the radiator. These all should be 12mm fasteners. It may be easier to jack the front of the vehicle up. Use floor jacks and jack stands if you're doing that. After you get the shield off, we're going to loosen up the petcock here on the driver's side of the radiator. Turn that counterclockwise, and that'll get the coolant draining. So while that's draining, I'm going to work on getting the lower hose off. We need to take the squeeze clamp here and squeeze it and slide it back on the hose. I'm just using a pair of hose clamp pliers, but a pair of standard pliers works just as well. For reference, I'm on the passenger side of the vehicle now. So now once you got the hose clamp pulled back, you go ahead and wiggle the hose and pull it off the neck of the radiator. Most likely, if you haven't let most of the coolant drain out, a lot of coolant will come out fast. If you let the coolant drain out, yours should be good. So now that we've got the lower hose off, we're going to go back up top, remove the top engine cover by lifting straight up and pulling it off. It's just mounted with rubber grommets. After that, we're going to take the upper radiator hose and pull it off the neck. So you're going to squeeze this clamp, slide it back, and once you get this clamp slid back, you can wiggle the hose off the neck of the radiator. Once you get it wiggled off the neck of the radiator, if you're replacing it, you can go ahead and take it all the way off on the other end. In this case, the customer is not replacing the hose. He just wants to reuse it, so I just tucked it out of my way. Now at the radiator fill port here, we're going to take the overflow hose off and tuck it off to the side. So right now we're going to work on getting the fan and fan clutch loosened from the water pump. You're going to need a special tool to hold the water pump here into place while you loosen up the fasteners. Or get creative on how to wedge something in there and hold it. So what this tool does is it wedges itself against one bolt and holds the other, while you use a 12mm wrench to loosen up the fasteners that you're not wedged against. So right here, I'm hooking one end around the bolt and then wedging the ear onto the top of the other one, loosening up a fastener. And then what we're going to do is, once it's loosened, we're going to rotate the pulley clockwise like this, and we're going to hook onto the next bolt. So we'll rotate it like this. We'll rotate the tool around and hook onto the next one. That'll hold it in place, and we'll loosen up the next fastener. And we'll work our way all the way around the fan clutch until all 4 of the fasteners are loosened. If you notice, I didn't take the belt off or anything. It's still on there. That also helps with taking these bolts off by leaving the belt on. I will link this tool up in the description of the video. I like to loosen all 4 of the fasteners first and then go back around and take them off. Now that the fan clutch is unbolted, what we're going to do is we're going to wiggle it side to side and get it to come off the studs. And then we're going to set it down inside the fan shroud. We're not going to be able to get it out just yet. We need to unbolt the radiator and take it out. To unbolt the radiator, I'm using a long extension with a 12mm socket. I'm going to go through the bumper right here and get to the bolts on the bottom of the radiator. So if you look here, I'm going through the bumper, and then there's a hole inside the core support there. We're going to go through and remove the bolt from the bottom of the radiator. Then at the top of the radiator, we're going to go through this hole on the top of the core support and get to the 12mm bolt here and take that off. And it's the same thing on both sides, left and right. So we're going to come on this side, take the fastener out, and then go down below and go through the bumper again, and then go through the hole in the core support and loosen up the fastener. There's a good chance when you take the bolt off, when you go to pull your socket out, the bolt will fall inside the hole. So having a pencil magnet like this makes it easy to get the bolt out if you happen to do that. Also on your sockets, if you happen to have semi-wobble sockets like this one here, it makes it a little easier to get to the bottom ones. And they're a slight little angle. The bumper's at a slight little angle when you slide it through. So having the semi-wobble helps you get onto the fastener nice and straight. If you notice, I'm using impact tools to remove these to make it faster. You can do this all by hand or with power tools. I like to use the cordless power tools. They make jobs like this much faster. I will link up all the ones I'm using in the description of the video. So once you get all 4 of the fasteners removed, the radiator's not going to fall anywhere. There's little hooks on the radiator to hook into the core support to hold it in place. So you're going to go ahead and remove those. As you can see here, I'm using that pencil magnet to retrieve those bolts. Before we remove the radiator, we need to remove these plastic panels here. They're just held on with some plastic clips. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull all the clips off on the left and the right side. So you follow them around and remove the clips and then pull these off. These help direct the air into the radiator. So these have an important job, but they're in the way right now. So we're going to take these out. So now what we're going to do is we're going to lift the radiator and fan shroud out at the same time. I made a little mistake in here, and I'll show you that in just a second. There's one step you want to do before we get to this part, but I'll show you that. So what I did was I lift the radiator and fan clutch out as high as I can, and then you slip the fan clutch out and remove it. If you had a second person, that would be a handy time to have them. So here on the passenger side, the transmission cooler lines were clipped onto the fan shroud, and I forgot to unplug them from the fan shroud here. So the cooler hoses are just clipped to a mount on the fan shroud here. So we just use a flat blade screwdriver and kind of pop this little plastic panel open, and then you can pull the hoses off the fan shroud here. You don't have to unplug them or anything, just push them off to the side like that. And now we're ready to lift the radiator back out of the vehicle. And as you can see, it just lifted straight up and out. So with the radiator out, we have plenty of room to work on the thermostat here. Also, if you notice, we didn't take the belt off. We're not going to touch any of that. We're just going to remove the 3 fasteners here holding the thermostat on, remove the thermostat, belts, everything stay in place. Once you remove the 3 fasteners from the thermostat, it just pulls off. Now we're going to take the new replacement thermostat and slip it into place, and we're going to bolt this up. So you just slide it onto the studs and start the 3 nuts. These are all 10mm bolts or nuts that are holding it on, so you're going to screw those back into position. And then I just used a standard wrench to snug them up, so I tightened them up until they were tight, and then about a quarter turn more. I didn't use a torque wrench because the back bolts is kind of awkward to get a torque wrench in here and get an accurate torque on it, so I just did them all by hand. So the lower hose was attached to the thermostat housing. I recommend replacing them, but if you're not replacing them, you can reuse them. This customer elected to reuse the hose. So these hoses rot from the inside out, so you want to check for that. So you're just going to feed this down into position and go ahead and start that. Then you can go ahead and start the hose clamp here and put that back into position. Now we're going to work on transferring the fan shroud from the old radiator to the new radiator. So there's only 2 fasteners at the top of the fan shroud. We're going to unbolt that and transfer it over. At the bottom, they have these little hooks here that the fan shroud hook into the bottom of the radiator. So what we're going to do is at the top of the radiator, we're going to remove the 2 fasteners on the top corners here. They're 10mm bolts. And then once we got those removed, we're going to lift the fan shroud off, and we'll transfer it over to the new radiator, hook it in the bottom. So you'll just line up the 2 tabs, slide it in, and then drop the fan shroud down. Now the hole should be lined up at the top. You can go ahead and start the 2 fasteners and run them in until they're snug. I'm using my little impact tool here with a variable trigger. You don't want to tighten them down too tight because this is a plastic fan shroud, so just snug is all you need. And go ahead and hook the vent tube for the overflow bottle back up. So at the bottom of the old radiator is going to be this foam pad here. I'm going to peel it off and transfer it over to the new one. This helps direct the air and keep the air flowing in certain directions, so I'm going to transfer it back over. I think it's an important part of the radiator system. A lot of people do not put those on there. So I just peeled it off, and what I'm going to use is some black 3M super weather adhesive and just put a bead on here and then glue it back on. So this 3M weather adhesive, it takes a few minutes to tack up, not very long. So I'll put it in position, push it into position, and then wait for a couple minutes for it to tack up and hold. So when we go to put the new radiator back in, there's these little tabs here that they hook onto the core support. And I'll show you on the old radiator here. So if you look right here, there's a little tab here and a little tab here on the other side. So when we slide it in, there's going to be a hole right here on the core support. It's going to hook into that, and that'll hold it into position and line up all the bolt holes for us. So when we slide it in, that's what we're going to look for. We're going to slide it down until that goes into position. So we're going to carefully lower the radiator in about halfway, and then we're going to reach over and grab our fan clutch here and stick it inside the fan shroud. So we're going to tuck it in here like this and let it tuck at the very bottom. And then we're going to finish lowering down the radiator and hook those little ears I was telling you about into the little ports, and that'll hold the radiator into position. You just want to take your time and look and make sure everything is in the right position when you do this. If you have a second helper, that actually helps out really well, especially on the passenger side where they can look for those transmission cooler lines, make sure they're not snagging on anything. Now, a trick for starting the bolts, what I do is I take a piece of paper and I stuff it in my socket here like this, and then I'll take the bolt and stuff it into the socket, and that'll hold it in place while I feed it through and start the fasteners. Now, I start all 4 fasteners by hand. I leave them loose until all 4 are started. That way I have a little bit of wiggle room up, down, left, right to get everything started. Once they're all 4 fasteners are started, then I go around all 4 corners and tighten them up. So I just run them in until they're snug and about a quarter turn more. This paper trick in the socket works really well, but if you have magnetic sockets, that works even better. So once I got all 4 of the fasteners started, like I said, I tightened them all up by hand. I did not use the impact tools on these. I just ran them in until they were snug and then about a quarter turn more. Now that the radiator is bolted up, we're going to put the plastic shields here on the left and right side of the radiator to direct the air into the radiator. We're going to reclip those in. A lot of times these clips break. You may have to get new ones. It's pretty common for the clips to break. So go ahead and install these 2 plastic panels on the left and right side of the radiator. Now that these plastic panels are secure, we're going to take the fan clutch and lift it back onto the stud of the water pump here. Once you got it slid on, we're going to go ahead and start all 4 of the nuts. So the top ones are going to be the easiest ones to get to. So a lot of times what I do is I put on as many as I can reach. I know you can't see what I'm doing, but this is a finesse thing where you hold the nut on the tips of your fingers and get these started. You can try twisting your hand backwards and feeding your hand in backwards or sideways, whatever's comfortable for you to get your hands in here and start the 4 nuts on the fan clutch here. So now that I got all 4 of the nuts started, I'm going to go ahead and draw them in. So I'm going to start with one corner. I'm using a ratcheting wrench to do this. So I'm going to run it in about halfway. Then I'll switch over to the bolt on the exact opposite side. So basically I'm going to work in a crisscross pattern. So I'll tighten it up a little bit on one fastener here, and then I'll switch over to the opposite side and tighten it a few threads. And then I'll keep working back and forth until the fan clutch is drawn in evenly. Because if you do it all one bolt, it will cock the fan clutch. So you want to go back and forth, and draw the fan clutch in evenly. Once you got it all the way flush against the water pump, then you can go ahead and tighten all 4 of these fasteners down. When you go to tighten them down, you want to use that tool that we use to hold the fan clutch in the very beginning to take it off. So I'm hooking that in there to holding the bolt and using that to hold it in place from the pulley from spinning, and I tighten up the fastener. So I'm just running them in until they're snug and about a quarter turn or so more. You can just do it by feel, and then you rotate the pulley around with the tool, and then you do the next fastener, and you just keep going around till all 4 of the fasteners are tight. Now that the fan clutch is secure, you can go ahead and reinstall your upper radiator hose or replace your upper radiator hose, whatever you want to do. Go ahead and just slide it on and slide the clamp back into position or replace the clamp. After getting the hose secure, you can go ahead and put the top engine cover on. It just has these rubber grommets that it mounts on. You just line the tabs up, and then you press the cover down. Now back underneath the vehicle, we can go ahead and start the transmission cooler lines that mounted onto the fan shroud. Go ahead and clip those back into position, and also put the lower radiator hose on and put the clamp on here. Now we can put the lower skid plate back on. It has these little hooks right here on the left and right side of the skid plate here. Those are going to hook in the bottom of the core support right here. So you're going to look for these little notches. So you'll put them in and slide them over to the left or towards the passenger side. So you'll lift it up, slide it over. Once you get it slid into position, now you can start the 4 fastener or the 5 fasteners holding the skid plate down and tighten those up. Now you can fill the vehicle up with 50/50 Toyota approved coolant, and then we're going to start the vehicle, and we're going to switch the heater control to the hottest positions and put the blower on the lowest position. You want to make sure that air conditioning and defroster is not on. It's in the heater position. So now we're going to let the vehicle run for about 10 or 15 minutes until that thermostat opens up, and we're going to double check our coolant level. So this is 50/50 mix of coolant, 50% distilled water, 50% Toyota approved coolant. We're also going to fill up the overflow bottle here on the side of the radiator, make sure that that's topped off. And the lower hose here, you're just going to feel it, and when it gets hot, the thermostat has opened up, and then this coolant level may drop, and you may have to top it off. I'm using a spill-proof funnel here, but if you can just pour it into the top of the radiator and make sure it's level at the top of the neck. So like I said, this takes about 10 or 15 minutes. So once that hose at the bottom here gets hot, the thermostat is opened up. You can go ahead and go for a test drive, and also make sure that your overflow bottle is filled up. I will link up all the parts and tools that I use in this video in the description of the video. I'm Brian Esser from How To Automotive. I'd like to thank you guys for watching, encourage you to subscribe, invite you to head over to the howtoautomotive.com website for more valuable videos like this. Thank you again for watching.